when Jeff Bezos sold Amazon shares worth $58 billion just days before his lavish 3-day wedding celebration to Lauren Sanchez. No one thought much of it, after all. Billionaires move money all the time, and weddings, no matter how extravagant, often come with costs to cover and stories to spin. But when news broke almost simultaneously that Lauren Sanchez had become the rumored owner of Vogue magazine, a publication valued at nearly $5 billion, and that the iconic editor-in-chief Anna Wintour was stepping down after 37 years at the helm, the world took a collective gasp. Not because the pieces didn't seem to fit, but because they fit too well, too perfectly, and suddenly what was supposed to be a love story, unfolding in the picturesque canals of Venice, transformed into a question mark painted in gold. Was this all just an extravagant coincidence, or was it the most luxurious gift in modern history? A wedding present unlike any the world had ever seen. A living, breathing cultural institution placed in the hands of a woman who had already become the most photographed bride on earth. And as headlines swirled and timelines flooded with posts, reactions, and think pieces, the truth became murkier, not clearer. And in that murkiness, a different story began to rise. Not one of gossip, but of gravity, of how quickly fiction can become fact when wrapped in just the right amount of fantasy, because the wedding itself was beyond imagination, staged across palazzos, yachts, and even the island of San Giorgio Maggiore. No detail was left untouched, and every decision seemed designed not just for the guests, but for the global audience watching from their phones. Opera legend Andrea Bocelli sang under Renaissance frescoes, and Lauren Sanchez, dressed in a lace Dolce & Gabbana gown with 180 silk buttons and a high collar that whispered, "Old world royalty," danced until dawn in crystal mesh at a pajama-themed after-party with celebrities like Oprah Winfrey, Kim Kardashian, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Tom Brady sailing from one event to another in water taxis that looked like scenes out of a movie. It wasn't just a wedding. It was an opera, a spectacle, a moment of storytelling at its richest. But what stole headlines even more than the guest list was the image that surfaced mid-celebration, a digital cover of Vogue featuring Lauren Sanchez in her wedding gown, photographed by Annie Leibovitz and tagged not just as a bride, but as Lauren Sanchez Bezos, and that one cover lit a match because Vogue covers aren't usually given to newly married billionaire wives. They are reserved for pop icons or models or fashion changemakers, and this move came just days after Anna Wintour herself informed staff she was stepping down from her role as editor-in-chief of the American edition of Vogue after nearly 4 decades. And though she would remain involved globally, her departure was seen as seismic, and the timing was impossible to ignore. 2 events that could be explained separately, but together created a storyline that was irresistible to the public imagination. And that's when the whispering started faster than facts could keep up. Anonymous sources claimed that Jeff Bezos had secretly been in talks to buy Conde, Nast, Vogue's parent company, and that Anna herself was helping orchestrate the transition, supposedly as a wedding gift from Bezos to Sanchez, echoing the 1950s legend of Samuel Newhouse, who bought Vogue for his wife Mitty simply because she loved it. And suddenly, what had been fantasy seemed historical, even logical. A media mogul giving the most iconic fashion magazine in the world to his new wife, as a symbol of her arrival into cultural royalty, and the internet went wild. Reddit threads dissected share prices, Instagram flooded with comments ranging from stunned admiration to scathing criticism. Twitter exploded with memes, and TikTok creators stitched the Vogue cover with rocket launches asking, is this real love, or just the most expensive brand rollout in history? And the more people speculated, the more the rumor hardened into belief, because the details aligned with everything people already believed about power, about wealth, about fame, and above all, about how influence works in a world driven by narrative, by drama, by viral spectacle. Because this wasn't just about a woman in a dress or a billionaire with shares, it was about what happens when the most watched couple on Earth stages a moment so large, so layered, that it swallows fact and fiction whole. And as more voices joined the fray, from celebrities to journalists to everyday viewers, the story took on a life of its own. No longer about whether it was true, but about what it meant. And somewhere in that frenzy, a deeper truth was emerging. Not about the sale, but about us, about the culture we've built, where a digital cover can spark global controversy, where an unconfirmed whisper can reach millions before any formal announcement is made, and where a wedding dress can become a symbol of everything people hope for, fear, or envy. Because in that moment, Lauren Sanchez became more than a bride. More than a media personality, she became a screen, a canvas, a mirror onto which the world projected its wildest dreams and deepest doubts. and that power, whether purchased or not, had already been claimed by her. The thing about rumors is that they don't need proof. They just need oxygen. And the cover of Vogue gave this one an entire atmosphere to breathe in. Because the moment that photo went live, Lauren Sanchez smiling in couture lace tagged as Mrs. Bezos and captured by one of the most iconic photographers alive, it felt more than real. It felt official, as if the crown had already been passed, and behind that feeling was timing. That felt too orchestrated to ignore Anna Wintour, stepping down after 37 years the same week the cover dropped Bezos, selling billions. In Amazon shares days before the wedding, and whispers of layoffs and corporate reshuffling at Conde Nast only fueled the fire. And in a world where speed beats certainty, the narrative caught wildfire. Every tweet, every comment, every article added. Kindling one British tabloid even went so far as to cite unnamed insiders claiming the sale was a done deal, and that the cover was not just a tribute but a transfer, a symbolic handover of power from the Queen of Fashion to the new Empress. And it wasn't hard to believe, because Bezos had done it before he had bought the Washington Post. He had launched Blue Origin, he had taken William Shatner to space. So why not buy the Bible of fashion for the woman who had become his world? And whether you adored or despised her, no one could deny that Lauren Sanchez had arrived, and not quietly, but with volume, with spectacle, with presence. And suddenly every outfit, every photo, every moment of her wedding became a clue. In the larger story was the yacht party. Just a party, or a declaration of status, was the pajama after party. A nod to youth and relevance, or a calculated move to appear relatable. Was Andrea Bocelli's performance just romantic? Or was it strategic, a way to position this wedding as something timeless, classic, operatic? And behind every image was a question. What if this was all curated? Not just for beauty, but for power. And that possibility cracked open the floodgates of opinion. Because in that uncertainty, people projected their own truths. Some saw it as modern love, as a celebration of reinvention. A 55-year-old Latina woman, once a news anchor, now flying rockets and wearing couture, standing proudly beside one of the richest men on the planet. And others saw it as something darker, a symbol of excess. A sign that influence could be bought like handbags and headlines, that if you had enough money you could skip the line and write your own story with no edits. And while the internet fought over whether Lauren deserved the cover, what no one could deny was that she had become the story. And in that story came the clash of eras, because Anna Wintour represented a fashion world rooted in legacy, gatekeeping, curation, quiet power, while Lauren Sanchez represented a new world, louder, faster, algorithmic, bold. And for some, that shift felt like betrayal, like watching a grand cathedral of taste replaced by a billboard. And yet for others, it felt liberating. The breaking of a glass ceiling, the turning of a page, the proof that anyone could be anything if they dared enough and spent enough and believed enough. And in that collision, the comments kept coming. Celebrities weighed in. Rosie O'Donnell wrote a poem dripping in disdain. Meghan. Kelly called the wedding a middle finger to modesty. Meghan McCain called it reckless. Katie Couric threw subtle shade while praising. Mackenzie Scott and Sarah Jessica Parker froze on live TV when shown the cover, unsure whether to cheer or cringe. And in their hesitations, their judgments, their sarcasm, what emerged was not just envy or anger, but a kind of mourning for a world where things were simpler, or at least slower. And that's what made this moment so potent, because it wasn't just about a rumor, it was about a rupture, a cultural shift captured in one woman's dress, one man's wallet, and one magazine's decision to lean into the chaos. Because while everyone argued about taste and tact and timing, Conde Nast stayed silent. And in that silence, the rumor became gospel for millions. People created TikToks breaking down how many shares Bezos would need to sell to buy the company. Others posted side-by-sides comparing Sanchez to historic Vogue icons, while fashion writers debated whether beauty without boundaries was the future or the end of the line. And in the middle of it all, Lauren said nothing. She didn't need to, because the image had already done the talking, and perhaps that silence was the loudest move of all, because in a world drowning in commentary, restraint can be power. And just like that, the story evolved again, shifting from a rumor to a revelation to a referendum on who gets to lead, who gets to belong, who gets to be called iconic.
This was only the beginning.
It wasn't the first time the world had seen a powerful man in love give something enormous to the woman he adored, but something about this moment hit differently. Maybe because it felt less like a gift and more like a shift, as if Jeff Bezos had handed Lauren Sanchez not just a ring or a lifestyle, but a legacy. And the moment that cover hit screens, every wedding dress she wore, every whisper of her name, every blink of Anna Wintour's absence became charged with a meaning far greater than who wore what and who stood where. The debate wasn't just about fashion. It was about legitimacy, about worth, about control. Because what Lauren stood for, whether she meant to or not, wasn't just excess or elegance, it was transformation. She was a woman who had rewritten herself in full public view, a Latina news anchor, turned Hollywood pilot, turned billionaires, bride turned rumored fashion mogul, and people didn't know whether to clap or panic. Some saw aspiration, others saw invasion. Some saw beauty, others saw betrayal, but everyone saw her. And maybe that was the point, because power today doesn't always come with announcements. Sometimes it arrives wearing heels and silence and a perfectly timed post. And what made it all the more hypnotic was how fast the story took root without a single source confirming anything. The narrative grew, legs, teeth, and an entire engine of opinion analysis and outrage. It spread from Instagram captions to Reddit threads to TikTok timelines, where creators layered her wedding clips with voiceovers saying, "This is what happens when you marry right." And the comments flooded with praise and fury and envy and admiration. And suddenly the cover wasn't just a photo, it was a litmus test. A Rorschach inkblot that revealed everything people felt about gender, about status, about how media was no longer just reporting culture, but creating it in real time. And what made it so gripping was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a wild guess. Maybe it was a soft launch, a slow reveal of something larger. And while official sources denied any sale and no paperwork surfaced, people didn't care, because in the age of emotional truth, what feels true is often louder than what is. And to many, it felt like she had already taken the throne. And in some way, maybe she had, because the attention was hers. The headlines were hers. The power to provoke conversation without uttering a word was hers. And when the New York Times finally weighed in with a piece calling the story fiction born in fantasy, people still weren't sure what to believe, because by then, the story had become too delicious, too symbolic, too telling of the moment we live in to let go of. And that's where the real impact was not in whether the rumor was true, but in what it exposed: the ease with which the public now accepts spectacle as fact, the craving for icons we can both worship and destroy, and the way women like Lauren Sanchez are judged not for what they say, but for how they stand, what they wear, who they marry, and whether they smile too much or not enough. And that spotlight has weight even when it sparkles. And maybe what hurt people most was not the rumor itself, but the idea that someone could step so seamlessly into a world once reserved for legacy names and reshape its rules without asking for permission. Because for all the talk of progress, we still wrestle with the idea that power must be earned slowly, quietly, modestly. But what if it doesn't have to be? What if it can arrive loud and laughing and covered in Swarovski crystals? And maybe that's what Lauren's cover did. It broke an invisible code, one that said you can be rich but not too loud, successful but not too shiny, powerful, but only if your story feels humble and digestible, and hers didn't. It felt defiant, radiant, unapologetic. And for many, that made her dangerous and irresistible all at once. As the rumor storm swirled beyond control, what made it even more surreal was not just the public reaction, but the way celebrities began to weigh in, as if drawn by gravity to the spotlight around Lauren Sanchez and Vogue like moths, to couture flame from biting comments, to barely veiled shade. What should have been a celebration of love and legacy turned into a digital battlefield where every opinion became a statement, every silence a position, and every post a bullet in a war between perception and power. Charlize Theron dropped the first grenade, joking at a charity gala that she must have been the only woman in Hollywood who didn't get invited to Venice. Then added, "That's okay because they suck and we're cool." A line that went viral within minutes. Lauren, reportedly furious, had to be talked down from clapping back on Instagram, and that was just the beginning. Rosie O'Donnell published a furious poem on her Substack, lamenting the billionaires and the circus of it all, comparing the wedding to a Roman feast and calling Lauren a fake femme wife in a world that had lost its compass. Meanwhile, Katie Couric praised Mackenzie Scott in an Instagram comment, calling her "my hero," echoing Maya Farrow, who posted "How cool is Mackenzie Scott?" under a post celebrating her billions. In charitable donations, a subtle but piercing contrast between the quiet, philanthropic former wife and the glammed-up new bride dripping in lace and speculation. Even Sarah Jessica Parker, known for walking the tightrope of diplomacy, stumbled on live television when asked to comment on the cover, freezing for just a second too long before saying, why shouldn't she have that opportunity too? The hesitation was dissected like a crime scene by gossip sites and fashion blogs, and the fallout led Parker to reportedly apologize to both Lauren and Anna, insisting she meant no shade and supported all women owning their moment. And as more voices joined the chorus from Meghan McCain, who blasted the wedding as reckless excess, to Megyn Kelly, who called it a staged headline grab designed to wave money in the face of a weary world. The divide only widened because this was never just about a cover. It was about what the cover represented. The fear that culture was being bought, the anger that something sacred was being commercialized, the discomfort of watching a woman step into a space that had once been gatekept and do it without apology or approval. And through it all, Lauren said nothing. Not a tweet, not a statement, not a single clap back. Just image after image, post after post, a quiet storm of curated presence that spoke louder than any press release. Because when you control the frame, you don't need to defend the picture. And maybe that's what made her so magnetic. And so maddening, because she was playing a different game. One not based on old rules or quiet ascents, but on optic scale and momentum. And while traditionalists mourned the fall of fashion's last temple, others celebrated the birth of something new, something disruptive and deeply modern. A shift from exclusivity to spectacle, from legacy to virality, from earned presence to claimed space. And whether you loved her or loathed her, the story was no longer about what was true or false, but about what you believed about beauty, about power, about the right way to rise. And that's why the rumor survived long after the facts came out, because facts couldn't compete with the myth, and by now the myth had become folklore, the lavish wedding. The billion-dollar rumor, the silent bride in the spotlight, and the world watching not for confirmation but for continuation, desperate to know what came next. And then just like that, the music stopped. Not on a stage or a yacht or a palazzo, but in a quiet press release buried beneath fresher celebrity headlines in late July, when the fever had finally broken and the clicks began to cool major news outlets. Published what should have been the end of the story, but to many felt like the beginning of the truth. Because after all the whispers, all the speculation, all the stitched TikToks and dissected Instagram captions, after the tweets and the poems, and the commentary disguised as concern came. The investigation, the facts, the denials, the return to earth. And it turned out there was no sale, no contract, no transfer, no truth to the tale. Jeff Bezos had not bought Vogue. Anna Wintour had not resigned. In protest, Conde Nast was not changing hands, and Lauren Sanchez had not become the new queen of fashion. She had simply graced a digital cover in a dress on her wedding day, photographed beautifully during a moment she had every right to celebrate. And the timing, the speculation, the outrage, all of it had been a mirage born from one breathtaking image and the world's hunger for stories too good not to believe. But the damage had been done, not to reputations, but to reality. Because what this saga showed was not just the power of money or the reach of fame, but the fragility of fact in a world that runs on speed and spectacle. And what it revealed about us is more telling than anything it revealed about them. How quickly we'll fill in the blanks,
the woman.
how easily we'll believe what fits our own narrative,
far more influential.
how desperately we want fairy tales to be true, even if they're gilded in envy or suspicion or scorn, and how the image of a woman in a lace gown can become a battlefield for everything we feel about power, legacy, and visibility. And yet underneath all of that noise is a simpler story, one of a woman who built a life in front of cameras and under pressure, who learned to fly when the world was trying to keep her grounded, who found love late and chose to celebrate it publicly, who became a symbol not because she asked to be, but because the world needed one. And Lauren Sanchez didn't buy Vogue, but she did buy silence. She bought grace. She bought the right to walk into a new chapter on her own terms. And for that alone, she became unforgettable, because in the end, this wasn't about Conde Nast or Anna Wintour or a billionaire wedding. It was about the way we see women and the stories we tell about them. The way we react when someone doesn't ask for permission to rise, the way we confuse extravagance with emptiness, and the way we reach for spectacle when we feel most powerless. And in that sense, the rumor wasn't the scandal. The reaction was because because the truth is, this story wasn't about fashion. It was about projection.
Friendships with Oscar.
And the only thing more powerful than owning a magazine is owning the moment.
Strategy
and no matter how the headlines fade or the timelines shift, that part belongs to her forever.